My cousin and I were out hunting together one day in the woods. We hadn't gotten so much as a glimpse of deer or anything else worth shooting for that matter. The woods were quiet, and our hopes of bagging something that day were starting to fade. So after some time, we decided to take a break and walk out of the main hunting area. We headed for a patch of power lines about a mile away, figuring that we'd stretch our legs. After a bit, we found a big rock next to a large boulder and decided to sit down, have a drink, and kill some time by throwing rocks around, hitting them off of a bigger rock. There was some guy on a hill about a mile away, standing and taking pictures of us. He had a camera or a phone, hard to tell from that far away, but he was pointing it down the hill at us. We sat there for a while, and the guy kept filming us, or at least watching us. My cousin, being the type to never back down, gave the guy the middle finger and kept it up for a solid 5 minutes. The guy, who had been silent up until then, started screaming at us. He was yelling at us, but we couldn't make out the words, just a bunch of angry noises, just constant, loud, rage-filled yelling. We decided it was probably best to leave and head back to camp. As we started walking, we heard him getting louder. The guy was running down the hill towards us now, full-on sprinting. We started jogging too, just to get away from him. We kept running for a while, trying to stay ahead of the guy. After about a mile of jogging, we slowed down a bit. We were still a good way from camp, but we thought that we'd maybe lost him. We stopped to eat some berries off a bush, trying to catch our breath. When we looked up, we saw him again. He was moving fast, walking briskly towards us. As soon as he saw us, he started shouting again. This time we did a full sprint the entire rest of the way back to camp, and so did the guy behind us. By the time we finally reached the camp, we were out of breath and totally freaked out. That's when the other people at the camp, our parents, heard us yelling and came out to check. My cousin said some crazy guy was chasing us, and on cue, the man broke out of the woods and into our camp. The guy was only 50 yards away now, and we could clearly see him for the first time. With his ripped clothes and wild eyes, he was still shouting and cursing at us. As he entered the clearing from the woods, he also pulled out a knife from a holster on his side. At that point, my dad grabbed a shotgun and told the guy to stop, telling him to turn around and leave or they'd have to shoot him. The guy didn't listen. He took a few more steps towards us, still yelling random, incoherent stuff. It wasn't until my uncle also appeared and raised a rifle towards the man that he finally stopped. He shouted one last string of curses and muttered something about us being on his land before turning and walking back up the mountain into the woods. We called the police, and they told us that people like him were often hanging around on the other side of those power lines. There was a homeless camp up there, a place where addicts and drifters would set up tents. It's been years now, but we still joke about that day. We call it the day that we angered the protector of the power lines, but even though we joke about it now, it got really scary once we saw he had a knife. It's a good thing he never caught up to us before we made it back to camp. This happened when I was about 10 or 11, camping with my mom near a river in the woods. It was just the two of us out there, no one else around. The nearest farmhouse was a couple of miles away, but we were mostly alone. We had the tent set up and a small campfire going when a little before dark, this man arrived to our site. The area we were in was open to anyone wanting to camp, so it wasn't strange to see somebody else, but he had no gear with him at all. He made conversation with us and eventually came around to warning us that there were wild dogs in the area that we needed to watch out for. My mom and I were slightly uncomfortable because he didn't leave and said that he would stay at the campsite a while to protect us from the wild dogs. My mom hinted several times that we would be fine and that he was free to leave because we didn't need his protection. But he didn't leave. He stayed a long time, but there wasn't much we could do because it was a public campsite. He had the right to be there if he wanted, even though he had no camping stuff with him. Eventually, my mom told the man that we were going into our tent for the night, thanked him for keeping us company, and said that he could leave and we would be fine. I asked my mom quietly if he was going to hurt us, and she said of course not, but I could tell by the way her voice cracked that she was scared too. We didn't want to provoke him, but we didn't want to make him feel like we were scared either. So we just crawled into our tent while the man kept sitting on a log at the fire pit. I don't think my mom slept that night, as she had a knife close to where she lay in the tent. I watched the man through the flap in the tent for a while. At one point, while sitting by the fire, he pulled out a long knife and started sharpening it on a stick. He just stared down at the blade and ran it along the stick, making these slow scraping sounds. I asked my mom if he was going to kill us, and she kept saying no, but I could tell that she was worried. She tried not to show it, but she was prepared for the worst. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up a lot to see my mom was still awake, lying there and listening to the scraping sound of the knife on the stick. By morning, the guy was gone. I wasn't sure how long he had stayed or when he left. After packing up our gear, we stopped by the nearest farmhouse to tell somebody about the strange man. At the farmhouse, the old man there listened to our story, then kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just Ivan. He means well, just doesn't know how to mind his own business." Apparently, he lived on a farm nearby, and the old man promised us that he'd have another word with his neighbor, reminding him not to be so rude and strange. A few years later, after our camping trip where we had met Ivan, I saw something disturbing. I was watching the news, and a man had been arrested who was a suspect in several missing person cases. They showed his photo on TV, and even though it had been a few years ago, I instantly noticed it was the guy who had been with us at the campsite. His name was Ivan Milat, a serial killer who had been picking up hitchhikers along the highways and killing them, and burying their bodies in the woods right across the river from where we had camped. I can't even describe the way I felt when I realized it. The guy who had been lurking outside our tent, sharpening a knife, talking about wild dogs, had been a serial killer. We had come so close to him, and I had no idea at the time. I don't think I'll ever forget that night and how lucky we were, but it still haunts me. I had a summer job when I was a 15-year-old girl that was a few miles from my house. I lived in a rural wooded area, and my parents never let me go into the woods by myself. However, they both worked days, and my job started at noon every day, so I had to walk to work. I chose to disobey them and walk through the woods instead of the road, because it cut about a mile off of my walk to work. So every day at the same time, I would walk through the very abandoned state forest down a deer path for a mile or so until it intercepted a railroad track. Then I would walk a couple more miles down the railroad tracks into town to my job. Taking this path always freaked me out, and I always felt like I was being watched, but it was shorter and less sunny, so I wouldn't get sweaty walking to work in the heat. Most days, I'd ignore my parents' influence, and they would pick me up after my shift, unaware of my daily routine. This routine continued for many weeks. One day, I was walking about a mile from any houses, deep in the woods, and there were 2 porn magazines that had been ripped out and placed on the trail facing me. They hadn't been there the day before. I was completely creeped out as they were clearly intentionally placed, and probably for me since very few people utilized this area. But I kept walking because if I turned around at this point, I'd have to go farther to get out of the woods and would also be late for work. This was a densely wooded area with brambles and dogwood and rolling hills, so I couldn't see very far in any direction. Suddenly, I could hear somebody else walking close by. I stopped, and I would hear them for a split second, and then they would stop. They sounded like they had loose change in their pocket, so I knew it wasn't an animal because of the echo. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Just to check that I wasn't crazy, I stopped once more, and I heard the same noise, which quickly stopped when I stopped. That's when I knew I was being stalked. My instincts told me not to speak and not to run, but to just keep walking down the dense deer path farther into the woods. My instincts told me not to look behind me. I could sense there was somebody right behind me on the deer path now, but I did not look back. Back then, I was a rather short, slightly chubby person, and looking at me, you'd probably assume that I couldn't run very fast. So if you wanted to catch me deep in the woods, you might assume you had plenty of time to do so. However, at the time, I ran cross-country and track at school, and could run a 7-minute mile with hills being my specialty. I always placed well on hilly terrain. By no means was I a great runner, but I knew I was likely faster than the creep who was hanging out in the woods stalking a teenage girl. It's not like I was processing this thought at the time, but I just instinctively knew not to run yet. I kept walking seemingly deeper into the woods, because I knew that the train track was up ahead, and there would be more space to run without tripping or getting caught in the tree branches. It was terrifying not to look back, but something told me not to. I just kept walking like nothing was happening and did not turn around. I could feel somebody maybe 20 feet behind me at this point following me for a good 1/8 of a mile. As soon as I got near the train tracks, I ran. I kept running, and I ran on all fours up the last hill before the tracks, gripping onto weeds to pull myself up faster, and then sprinted along the tracks as fast as my lungs and legs could carry me. I heard and saw branches snapping below me in the woods, but now I was out in the sun and the woods were dark, so I couldn't see what was behind the branches. I just kept sprinting. I never saw the person, but I knew their intentions were awful. I never cut through the woods again, and I didn't mention what happened to my parents because I was scared of being grounded. This happened about 15 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, attending a college in New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of people who all loved horror movies and adventure. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October near Halloween that we would find a very creepy wooded spot and explore. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out for the wooded area. We turned off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants, before immediately being greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees, very few streetlights, and very few houses. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we could collectively decide to pull over and go exploring. We made a left off the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into the darkness of the woods, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Eventually, our car made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see what exactly this was, and stepped over the log. We noticed that 2 narrow trails led in different directions. This seemed like a good time to grab our flashlights and explore the woods. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk in a single file line to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the farther we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only person who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as part of my imagination. In any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared, so I didn't want to tell anybody that we should stop and go back. We headed down the trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. It was a large open field of unkept grass. It was big, comparable to a golf course, I suppose, since we couldn't see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. On our right, there was an old beat-up house several hundred yards away that we decided to explore. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anybody living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards to one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live there was long gone. Because there was no way into the house, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by it, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from and have a seat in the field and rest. Before we all sat down, however, one of my friends began panicking and pointing out into the field back towards the house. We all turned around to look, and in the field across from us, we could see a tall and lanky figure in the moonlight who appeared to be dancing. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. It was a figure of someone or something dancing as it moved closer to the house we had just been at. What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever it was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and then started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we all freaked out and ran back to the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes on the way in, we made it back to our cars, hopped in, and drove away in only about 5 minutes. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly at a group of young adults not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. I still wonder if they knew who we were from the second we parked, and if the sound that I kept hearing while walking on the trail was that figure. Whatever the case may be, if it was a real person or something paranormal, it was downright scary, giving us more of an adventure than I think we had hoped for. I was black powder hunting alone on a private property in the woods one night many years ago in Kentucky. The property had a gated entrance, so I would park my four-wheeler there and normally walked in the remaining 200 yards to my elevated deer stand. As I shut my four-wheeler off and put on my backpack, I heard a very large limb snap, and I thought it was a deer or animal moving around maybe 20 yards away. I didn't think much about it, gathered my gun and hunting stuff, and started walking down the trail. My flashlight was off due to having good enough light from the moon to see where I was walking, and also because I knew where I was going. As I walked in the dark, I quickly realized something was paralleling my every step inside the woods. I walked and stopped, and it would do the same. By the time I realized it, it was too late to go back to the four-wheeler, so I picked up my pace and made a beeline for my deer stand. When I got within 10 yards of the stand, I heard another large limb snap really close to me on my left. I stopped, turned my flashlight on, and shined it in that direction. I saw two glowing green eyes about 10 inches apart, so instinctively, I raised my rifle and stomped my foot to try to scare it away. Not really sure what I was seeing, it just blinked its eyes once and never moved. I could not make out any details, just that it may have been crouched down due to the proximity of the eyes to the ground. Whatever this was, it seemed like a predatory animal, and I realized in that instant the best thing to do was to bolt up my ladder and to get in the stand as quickly as possible. It was no more than 8 steps away, and if I shot at it, I would have been blinded by the muzzle flash and it might attack if I missed in the dark. I basically just said a prayer and managed to make it up my deer stand without being attacked. The rest of the night, as I waited in the stand for daybreak, it circled my stand just out of range of my flashlight, and right before daybreak, I heard it go into the woods where it had followed me from. I waited up in my stand for a good chunk of the morning still, and then quickly made my way back to my four-wheeler. Right before I fired up the engine, I heard another branch or limb snap loudly. I left the area and went back home, cutting the week-long hunt short, and didn't return until the following spring. I've never hunted the same way again since, and rarely go out after dark on foot. I also sold that property the next spring. I was just so scared of whatever was hunting me out there.